outbound.com. Welcome everyone to our second Outbound Funds gathering, community gathering, if you wanted to add another word in there. Today's topic is budgeting in Outbound Funds. Um, let's see. We're going to do some welcome and intros here in a second, and then we're going to again do kind of three scenarios of how people are doing budgeting in Outbound Funds. We're going to start with Anne. Sorry, I butchered your name. Um, and he works at the College Success Foundation and how they do budgets. Then I will be showing a quick picture of budgeting with funds in Outbound Funds. And then Bill is going to be showing us grantee budgets or budgeting for grantees. And then we should have plenty of time to have a discussion for you all to share maybe how you're doing budgeting or questions you have about outbound funds. And then we'll do a wrap up with a talk about kind of what's coming up next and what we're going to do in May at our next meeting. So in the chat, if you could share your name, organization, role, and how you use OFM, that would be great. Just a quick way to know who all is on the call and just different ways that outbound funds is being used. I did want to take a moment and talk a little bit as you're doing that about the planning team. There is a group of us that meets monthly on a Friday to do the planning for both these sessions as well as kind of the future of outbound funds and how the community can be involved. Um, it is me, Bill, Kim, Judy, Nick, and Brian. On the call today are me, Bill, and Kim. And we just get together. If anyone is interested in being a part of that group, just either reach out on chat today or reach out in the Trailblazer community to either myself or Bill or Kim even, and let us know that you're interested in joining the team and we'll get you invited to that meeting. It's not meant to be a closed group. It's just yeah, just a group of people who are interested in moving outbound funds forward. The other thing, I'm not seeing anyone introduce themselves in chat, so make sure that you're introducing yourself in the chat. Bill and Kim, if you want to start that off, that would be amazing. The other thing that I wanted to talk about before we kind of dive in today is that we're aware that outbound funds does not have an official budgeting component in it. There are ways that you can use each one of the features in outbound funds, and we know that several people have chosen to have grants management because it does have objects in there. And then if you've dug into the nonprofit cloud grant making solution, there's budgeting in there as well. And we just wanted everyone to be aware that we know that and that there is the possibility that maybe in the future, if we all decide, hey, we'd love to add a budgeting component to OFM as a community group, we could talk about how to do that. All right. We're going to get started and jump in. I am going to stop sharing my screen so that you can share your screen and talk about the budgeting at the College Success Foundation.
Thanks for that intro. Let me see if I can. So I have a few slides, and then I would just want to show do a short demo in Sandbox. And so hope that my slides are showing currently. All right. So my name's Anne Wiegsma, Senior Salesforce Admin with the College Success Foundation. I joined them last summer, so it's relatively new still. And what's the College Success Foundation? So what we do is help students graduate from college, and we start really early. So in the high schools, we're already there. So we do have all kinds of sessions, and we provide coaching services while they're in college, and so financial support and coaching services. and we do lots of research if to see if our approach is successful and try to improve upon that. And how do we use the Outbound fund? So we have emergency fund request. That's for college students. And so that's relatively small amounts, $500 on average. And we use those, you can, from things like I can't afford my books for in this quarter, to my car broke down, I can't come to college, to all kinds of things. It's really meant to give a little bit of support and making sure that people can stay in college. And then recently we used this one custom object that data from I'm not sure if it is actually pre OFM, but it was quite old already, and there were quite a number of requests. So they wanted to be able to specify different payment methods, uh, different funding sources, because within one request, maybe the money is coming from different little jars of money that we have from donors. And we want to integrate and a number of forms that we need to have on file. And the big change that we do to the standard out-of-the-box solution is, instead of having the funding request look up to the funding program, is have the disbursement look up to the funding program. So that is the way that we can, for one funding request, we can specify multiple funding programs. Little bit, very short, the process. People fill out an online form, we use form assembly. Probably most people are familiar with that. There's an initial affiliation in Salesforce. Then it's assigned to a coach. The coach reaches out to the student, and they determine together the best way of support, and that can be listed here, different numbers of a way how to support them. And then after that all is done, there's a report that goes to finance, and they can import that into the financial system. And then last thing, that the next request I was starting working on this week actually is we don't want to give people actual cash, so we provide them with gift cards in those cases. And that is a provider called Tango. And they have a Salesforce integration, so we will be setting that up. Questions so far before I jump into the demo? All right. Don't see any hands or let's see. I'm sharing the right screen here. I think so. Let me zoom in a little bit. So it is in the sandbox. I just have some test data in here. It's coming in at the request, and there's an initial review. It's then assigned to a coach. We just use the owner field for that. And what the coach does is they have here a button. It's called review. And ScreenFlow that is running here in the background, of course, and this starting when you press the button, and the first will be asked to set up disbursements. They can see here if they already previously created some draft ones, and then they can add one by clicking on add and disbursement. And you can do one program and amount, the payment type, what kind of request it is. I've done now that when you click next, it creates it in the background. You immediately look back Then you can say if you want to add more or not. So let's add another one for another funding program, different amount, payment type. So basically they keep doing that until they are satisfied with the list that they have. Click done, and then they can finalize it then immediately, or if they need to come back later on, they can just click out of it. And date, uh, enter reason, some financial information, interactions. That's basically some case notes. You can see those. I will leave that blank. And then they are done. The funding request itself is then updated to awarded. And then we have here 2 disbursements. I will just open one. And you can see here's the link to the funding program. And all the information is on there, and based on the disbursement method, it's now scheduled to be paid by finance. And what we did on the funding program itself is at the box, right, you have the total program amount, and have then using the Dolores, or the declarative roll-up schedule summaries, and that will populate all these fields. And I'm just now thinking I didn't activate it here in the sandbox, so it's not running currently. So that was very quick. Questions, IDs, etc.
There's nothing in the chat, but anybody on the call, you're all welcome to come off mute or on camera, or drop your questions in the chat if you have any questions. And feel free to do that along the whole presentation today.
Not so much a question, but I liked how you are using funding programs to have multiple sources. I'm about to show another way to do multiple
Okay.
sources. I often think of only having one funding program. And so I appreciate that it's a new way of thinking about it.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate that.
I also like that you used DLRS. It's a good tool.
It is very good tool. Yeah, it's very great that it's out there in the community and being supported. Yeah.
And it's especially helpful with outbound funds because of that lookup relationship to the funding program rather than a master detail or relationship. So. Right. Okay, I'm gonna dive into the next one. If other people have questions or thoughts, feel free to unmute, raise your hand, put it in the chat. This is meant to be a conversation. So I am going to share my screen. And so what I wanted to show was budgeting with funds, and I originally had inbound funds in this as well. But because what I'm going to show is actually budgeting using what's called the general accounting unit in nonprofit success pack, or NPSP. Um, and the reason I'm using that is because for community foundations and for some other organizations, they might have incoming funds that are kind of building up the money that can then be dispersed. And so part of the budgeting process is knowing how much money has come in from the opportunity via the GAU allocation, and then how much can you then give away from that general accounting unit. I will say two things. Most of the time, I rename the general accounting unit to fund. And then I have also, instead of using the actual general accounting unit, if somebody doesn't have NPSP, I have just created an object called fund, and I connect it with the GAU expenditure. Because sometimes you might not be tracking things in NPSP or via opportunities, but you do want to have that kind of holder of the fund that's different from your funding program. So I will log into instance. So there are two things that we're going to look at today is tracking that inbound fund or inbound funds and then pulling that out like a DAF or a community fund, and then also splitting awards between those two funds using GAU expenditures. So first of all, we're going to look at a general accounting unit. Again, I left it as the regular name just so you all could identify it. And just the idea being that there is money coming in via the GAU allocations. You can see there's like $2,500,050 coming in. And then there are 3 funding requests that are pulling out of this same fund, $500,000 each. And all that really is there's an object called the GAU expenditure that hangs off of the disbursement. And so you'll notice that this disbursement is actually $750,000 because 500 or 250,000 is actually coming from the education GAU. And so it's two funds coming together to fund that single grant. And so you can see there's one disbursement. You don't have to do separate disbursements then. There's one disbursement of $750,000 via an EFT, but that in the background, you can see that it's coming from two different places. And this is the GAU expenditure manager that kind of allows you to do that management of the money either by percentage or by amount. But what really manages the budget in this scenario is the status of the disbursement or the status of the funding request itself. I've done it in both ways, where instead of being like, here's the money I have and here's how much I've given out, I've actually grouped it so that you can see paid and unpaid. If I go back to that original community fund, you can see that it's grouped by total disbursements paid and disbursements not paid, um, because that allows us to see like I still need money in my fund to pay for the things that aren't already dispersed, right? I can't just say, oh, we have $1 million, we paid $1 million. We might have 2 million more that we're going to disperse that have already been awarded. I've also added another roll up that is applied. So then you can see how much money has been asked for, how much money has been dispersed, and how much money is still waiting to be dispersed. So again, it's that budgeting aspect of that. Um, and then in this scenario, just to tie it back to funding programs, in this scenario, the funding program then becomes kind of those application cycles or those application groups that are going through the process. And so every funding request still has a funding program, but it becomes that cycle that can then be totaled up into a single funding program that ties back to the fund or another tool if you want to, um, or another grouping if you want to. I shouldn't have said tool. But all that to say, there's a few different ways that you can then manage those funds in the system. What I will say is because of how I'm splitting it and pulling it from different funds, unlike the first example. In this scenario, it adds in the 750,000 all to this application cycle. And so then budgeting wise, it's not going to look quite correct for the community fund. Um, so it's something to keep in mind in terms of how you as an organization want to be able to combine your funds. The last thing I will say is that inside of this dev org, as I was poking around to prepare for this, I noticed that I had created a budget object that I had tied into the funding program. Just as an example for somebody else, the idea that just like in grants management, the paid addition to outbound funds, I added just an object that stored the budget for this funding program. And then I'm able to allocate that budget out as kind of a test scenario rather than managing the budget by status of like applied or in review, awarded, that sort of thing. I'm able to manage this budget outside of the funding request process. Again, this is separate from what I've already showed, but I thought it's interesting that that you can just create kind of a budget object that has some hierarchy in it if you want to just simply track your budgets and then see how that you can kind of play with them a little bit easier. So, some ideas to think about. That is all I had to share today. I can definitely show more if other people are if people are interested in, but that is what I had to share. Were there questions or thoughts that people had?
Hi, this is Jake at United Way, Central Indiana. I was curious about, you mentioned using several funding programs as different like application cycles. We do something similar, and then we try to use the hierarchy at like a top level funding program, and then individual cycles being kind of underneath those. When you tie things to the GAU, do you have a way to distinguish uh, this is one, this is for this cycle, this GAU is for this cycle versus another, kind of limiting those amounts for the budget?
Not not in this scenario that I showed today. I've done that before where I've made a hierarchy that matches the funding program hierarchy in the GAU. And so there'll be like one GAU that's like the community fund, and then there'll be one for each usually year, but you can also do application round, if you have more than one round each year. So it'd be like Community Fund 2025, Community Fund 2024, or you could name them the same as your application round. But I've seen that done, and sometimes it's nice. Um, Other ways I've seen it handled is that people just tie it to the date then. And so instead of creating separate GAUs in a hierarchy, they just group the GAU allocations and expenditures by date, and that then shows them their different cycles.
Sure, you're saying they use that in a report or
Yeah,
dashboards or in all the
yeah,
above? Yeah.
yeah. A report that sometimes feeds a dashboard. But yeah. But it is a really good idea. Like that it's also a way to use the idea of a budget, right? Like you could have one big bucket and then you could have budgets for each cycle. So you know what you're doing. But yeah.
Yeah, I
Thanks,
think
Jake.
Yeah, I was just going to add my 2 cents where I think this model is really helpful is especially if you're working like I think you said like with donor advised funds, right? Like they may not use all of their funds, so it allows their fund to kind of roll over any balances, or you can take like any investment income and keep applying it to the fund as that grows, but then you can draw it down as you're spending. Maybe it's scholarships or doing grants out of that fund, and so I think this model works really well for those scenarios where you may have income and expenditures on a fund, and you want to keep track of kind of both flows of money. Um, so yeah, thanks for sharing that. Anybody else have any other questions?
Hi, this is Rachel. I'm at Thousand Currents. One thing we're struggling with is restricted funding from donors. You mentioned you're tying it to NPSP, and tying kind of semi-unrestricted budgeted funds to our outgoing grants, and then very restricted. Are you, I don't really know what my question is. Are you creating funding programs along those lines, like to line up with restricted funding from specific donors, or do you have a different system for managing that?
There's a couple of options. If there's a whole kind of group of grants that are going to be a part of those restricted funds. So let's say you have a donor who says, I'm going to give you $1 million and give it out to whoever you want, and you do an application cycle, and that's a specific kind of group of people or group of funding requests, then I would probably make it a funding program. What I've done in the past for kind of restrictions where like money comes in and they say it can only be used for, the example I'm thinking of was human services in Africa. So like it was like vaccinations and there was a deworming option, like, and they would only fund specific pieces of that work. What we actually ended up doing is using the GAU allocation and tying each allocation that was restricted to the fund that held kind of, or the general accounting unit that held that kind of money. So like they wanted to only do vaccination work. And so their money only went into the GAU for vaccination. And then the other piece was some people wanted to be able to tie the actual funding request to the opportunity. So like the money came in and that funder wanted to know that their money went to X clinic in the Congo. And so we would then have a process that would tie the opportunity to the GAU expenditure. We had an automation that would pull in the opportunity, and then it went up to the funding request from there. Does that help answer some of your, or give you some ideas at least?
Yeah. I think tying the opportunity to the GAU expenditure is exactly what we're looking at. So
Yeah,
yes, thank you.
because then you could tell, X foundation, it was the Campbell Foundation in this scenario, you funded money at this clinic in the Congo, and they really wanted that really specific tie.
Yeah,
Oh,
I was
But
gonna say, yeah,
it's
if that same donor is continuously giving, it may be hard to tie it back, right? Like if they're giving $1 million a year, you may want to just create a restricted GAU to be that fund that they're gonna, maybe multi-year invest in, and then you could just tie with those expenditures. You can tie those back to that particular fund. So it really depends on what your giving structure is for the input, but also how you want to track it on the output. And again, if you're taking applications that are a big bucket, but then like a piece of that's going to come out of that specific restricted fund, the expenditures is definitely I think your golden nugget right there for setting these up.
awesome. Thank you.
But like Sherry said, yeah, there's some automation that you may have to put in with like a flow or something like that, or some more fields, with a number of these scenarios. Sorry, Sherry. I just wanted to add my 2 cents there because I think that the GIUs are one of those things, like beautiful objects that in the right scenario they take they punch above their weight, I guess. It's like they're this hidden gem of an object that I think goes often underutilized or unused in NPSP.
Mhm. And
Yeah,
I think throughout history, the history of NPSP, they were unutilized. It's not just
yeah,
with OFM, but in general,
yeah.
they were underutilized. So
Yeah, but I guess I would argue that now that OFM kind of taps into the
yeah.
deduction of those funds, and now the opportunities kind of add to the growth of those funds, now you can really treat a GIU like a fund, like it's probably meant to be, and so now the
Mhm.
system is kind of complete. So I think they actually have a lot more utility when used with OFM.
Definitely, definitely. It is your turn next, Bill. So whenever
Yeah.
you're ready.
Does anybody? I didn't want to cut off
Yeah.
Sherry's conversation, but if there's anybody who has other questions about Sherry's example, feel free to drop it in the chat or come off mute. Okay. Well, I'm going to talk about grantee budgets. So let me hop out of the presentation. So in this scenario, and just for some background, so Council of Michigan Foundations, we have currently a program with our state's DNR, and it's federal funds that are coming to the state who then have asked us to work with very specific communities. The way the program's set up, though, they will get an award for the program, but they must submit receipts for reimbursement along the process. And so they have to do quarterly reporting, and then they may, issue expense reports along the way. And that is actually how they get their funds. So when they put in their initial proposals, they had to allocate their proposal to 9 different budget categories. And so along this process, we need to track their receipts against their budget and keep all of that in check, and then be able to process the payments and make sure they go out the door successfully. So we have this government grant program in my sandbox. And in here, we have the Springfield Town Square Park Revitalization. So if I scroll down to this funding request, I've created a formula field to give us just a really quick signal. I can scan this page. So it's just a simple formula field that is just looking to make sure that their budget is greater than their expenses. And that's all it's doing. But I can just quickly scan through here and look for a problem. So that at a very high level, I've just created 2 fields to capture these. So the budget field on all of these was what they initially submitted when they put in their funding request. So when they submitted the application, we recorded all of this. When we awarded, we may have adjusted these with the award, and that's the number that's in their grant agreement. Along the way, so all these would have started off as zeros. Along the way, they've been submitting progress reports. And so we are also using form assembly in this case. So we have a form, they put in their grant ID, it takes them to a screen and just gives them an option of what kind of form they want to submit. One of them is a progress report. And so they fill out their progress report, send it in, and then it drops into this custom object that we've built. And then we have some dates and status fields just to track who and when everything came in. And so they'll report their total expenses for the quarter. And then using those same categories, we're collecting that information and then storing it here. The fields on the previous page, let me go back to the funding request. These are roll-up summary fields. So again, if you wanted, you could use DLRS. So if you had a different data model or something, but just to keep it simple, roll-up summary fields are doing their job today. And so that's really how we're tracking all of this. But it's just pumping that back up there and then giving our team the ability to look at the budget. And then they can come in here, make sure everything's accepted, and then they can just change the status to accept it. The other thing, just to make the workflow a little bit easier, is we have a simple little screen flow. So if I was the reviewer that was reviewing these expenses, I would just make sure all the receipts and everything were in order, that they're not over budget. But with the screen flow now, I can go and create the disbursement. And so they've asked for 355. If I've accepted it, I can do 355,000. I've reviewed it. Hit next. And then you can see it says I've created my disbursement. And so just it keeps them from having to go to another screen, go to create, manually create that disbursement record, and I can use the data that we have here. And then I just click finish, and then it's back to the beginning of the flow. Then we'll go back here and go to our disbursement record, and there you go. We have an approved just for reimbursement as the type. So again, very simple. We have a very simple grant program. We don't have a lot of them that we need to manage budgets, but in this one in particular, we needed to be able to do that regular check-in with our grantees, make sure their budgets are on track, and just wanted something pretty simple to do that and not overcomplicate it. So it's just a custom object, or well, I guess 2 custom objects, and then a handful of fields and formulas and roll-ups. So if anybody has questions, happy to answer any questions about that or dig into any of it if you want me to go behind the scenes and show anything.
Do you use the files object to bring in copies of receipts and invoices and that kind of thing?
The answer is no. Form assembly is storing those, so we're actually just sending down the link to the file. So we're just storing the link to the file rather than storing it in Salesforce. But that would be an option. You could just grab the PDF of like the form assembly results and drop that in, you know, into the form or into the files section of the funding request. Or I'm sorry, into the progress report.
That makes sense. That's awesome. I was also curious um, about the approval process. So if whoever's submitting the receipts or that kind of thing, is there then a check on the Salesforce side to say, yeah, these receipts match up with the dollar amount. Now we can disperse this.
Yeah, so there is it's not in here. There is a checklist though, like for the staff that are doing the review that they have the steps. Honestly, it would be great to actually build those in and just be like, yep, check, check, check. But they're just supposed to review those documents, check it, and then when they create that disbursement, that's where they're checking that they acknowledge that everything's in alignment. So again, it's one of those. What you're asking is actually one of those things that's I've been kind of noodling on and thinking about, future or further enhancement. So you can take it as, sophisticated. You could do an approval process if you want to do something crazy, or again, another screen flow or something to kind of build out your checklist. I mean, really, you could probably build it right into the front end of that first check, that screen flow that's already there. Just add a few more questions and check boxes, and then authorize everything, and then record it as, who did that and when.
We have some different capital project budgets that we do reimbursements on, and this is like exactly what I was looking to kind of replicate. So thanks for sharing.
Yeah, yeah. Again, hopefully this helps, and I'll be interested to see what you end up building as well. Stop sharing. So we're at the discussion phase of the meeting. Is there any sort of budget tracking structures, anything that anybody's maybe thinking about that we didn't cover today, or maybe we are dancing around it, but you're looking for a solution, or just something you're struggling with? Or like Jake, you're in the middle of thinking about building something?
I would just like to get our community impact team that kind of manages the outbound funds processes. If they could all just agree on some budget numbers, some categories, some things that they want to ask to our for our grantees, so that not everything is a special snowflake. If we could standardize some of that stuff, we could utilize a lot of this sooner than later.
I saw Rachel had a laughing face emoji, and I was laughing to myself as well, Jake, because I will say we work with so many funders, and often we hear that same thing. It's like, well, we think this is what we want it to be, and then somebody else has a different idea, or this program, has a different structure. So that is probably the biggest challenge, is just to get everybody on the same page with how to structure these, how you want these to be represented or shown, or even like what Sherry was showing. Like, how do you want to structure your GAUs and your funding programs? Some teams even want to do it a little bit differently, so it can be a little bit of a challenge.
Maybe tied to that too, like when you're adding all these custom fields and you've got the categories changing from year to year. Like, does anyone have any good way that they've been managing that, aside from deprecating fields?
So Rachel, the only thing I've seen as a different approach, and this is unfortunately more fields, but maybe reusable fields, is somebody has like budget category 1 through 10, and then a budget like category label 1 through 10. And so like your funding, and again, you could do some of this with like a flow or some automation, but you could like say like, well, this funding program or programs, they all use the same 5 budget categories, 1 through 5, and they populate that. Not the most elegant solution, but I've seen people get by with I see Jerry nodding her head. I mean, there's ways that I've seen that happen where those values might be changing from program to program, but you want to have like a standard report and everything kind of shows up. But it can also make reporting a little bit tricky at times.
And say that the hardest thing is to remember what category one means for this program and what category one means for another program. We've added rich text fields like on the record page to like say like category one is this for this. But it can get really annoying to try to define that on the screen for everyone. Sometimes screen flows can help with that too. But again, it's a lot of formulas or like something that defines it for them on that page. But I've seen that a lot. We do that with a reviewing community that we've built where every panel gets to pick their categories and their questions of review. And since it's every panel, we use like question 1 and criteria 2 and those sorts of
Yeah, I will say also, if you're using like third-party tools to integrate, like we're using form assembly, I will say our team likes to change the wording of how a question or something is phrased. And so we still send it back to Salesforce as it's like original value. It's like it might be like equipment and construction, and we used to just call it construction, and so we would show it on a form as equipment and construction, and then just save it in Salesforce as construction, and we just kind of know internally what it means, but make the user facing side of things maybe a little bit wordier, or maybe it changes a little bit more. But again, that depends on how much variance you have in those categories.
Well, thanks everybody. That's good stuff. Anybody using budgets in a way that we didn't talk about today that they'd be willing to share? No? That's okay. Anything that we didn't cover that other than a couple questions we had that you're curious about, just about OFM or, not necessarily budgets in general?
I'm on a search uh for well, I've been noodling on a new flow to we give out mini grants at the same time. They're not kind of piecemeal. It's like this cycle we're going to give out 85 grants. And rather than go through the disbursement process of each of those when they're awarded, I want to be able to say, when this is marked as awarded, create the disbursement schedule of this because it's quarterly. And dates are tricky for one in Salesforce. And the create records flow, the create records variable is I just can't get my head wrapped around it. So if anybody has any good resources, send them my way.
I think you're headed down the right route. And I like I w- what I'm thinking about is just being able to create. Are you creating multiple disbursements for each, like quarterly disbursements for each funding request?
Yeah,
So you
so
have
we want
80,
to
so you
we want
actually
to
want to
see the
create.
scheduled ones, so when so we can create some more efficiencies in, okay, it's the end of the month, run all the ones that the disbursements that are due now, because we have so many overlapping programs.
Mm,
And honestly, it's the team last year missed a couple payments to some organizations. I'm like, oh my gosh, how did we do that? So just solving for no errors and more efficiency.
And at what point are you wanting to create the disbursements? Is it at the time that they've been awarded?
Yeah, I mean for the ones that are not reimbursable, that are just on a biannual or quarterly payment schedule, just when they are awarded to say at the beginning of the next quarter, set this disbursement scheduled and it will be this dollar amount. And then the following quarter, this one. But do that for 85 grants at a time.
Well, or so are you doing it at record triggered, or are you trying to do it on
It would be
schedule?
record triggered. Yeah. So
Yeah.
they would just, after the review process, kind of mark several awarded at the same time. And then
Yeah.
as those are, it would be record triggered based on that status.
Okay. And are the details for each one, like this one's quarterly, this one's biannual, this one's the amount is the same across all the payments, or it varies by whatever? Is
No,
that
no, it's
all kind of
they're
information you
split
know?
evenly. Yeah. Yeah. So I
Yeah, I
think
think,
that math, I think we can sort out.
yeah, it really just becomes the date math is the hardest, feels like the hardest part there.
Mhm.
What's today? I guess what the award date and what's the start of the next quarter based on today. I imagine that's kind of the math you're going for, and then
Yeah. Yeah.
X number of quarters beyond that, right?
Our finance team uses the system too, and I just created a bunch of dashboards for them. They wanted to see how long has it been for these pledges open, how many business days have these pledges been? So business days is a whole other thing. Um, but we got those figured out.
So what we do is, and it's not OFM that is already so pre-built, is indeed, and we have it a little bit easier than your scenario probably, but we have scholarship awards
Mhm.
and we schedule this for multiple years. And we pay out in per quarter, and the moment that we create it, we create we call those the distributions, not disbursement, distributions for the keep it confusing. And we schedule those all out in a scheduled status, and we update those uh, when we reach the date. And if anything happens, like some student loses their eligibility, then we update the award itself, and the underlying distributions are also updated. So we do it on the moment that's created, but it's quite a hassle with the dates and getting that right set up, and also keeping with like often if like an round up the amounts, right? Because maybe you award 10,000, but you do like, I don't know, 10 payments is easy, but like 6 payment, or where do you leave the last dollar, those kinds of things.
Yeah, I remember when we created the scheduled disbursements feature in Outbound Funds, just that rounding math. I remember that was the tricky part of the solution. But yeah, Jake, I don't have a solution for you, but I created a checkbox on ours that just does a single disbursement. We do some like scholarships or small grants to our members that are just one-time disbursements, and so it's usually as soon as it's awarded, we just have a check on the funding program that says like auto create disbursements, and then when it basically when any of its funding requests are awarded, it just auto generates that. So I would think you could maybe start with that. But again, figuring out the schedule and how many disbursements. I mean, but maybe there's a couple fields or something. But trying
I
to think
think
about how
half
that.
of it is I just like a challenge.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe challenge your team to use the scheduled disbursements feature.
Right, right.
Oh, thanks, Jake. Yeah. Anybody else? Well, it's good to have all of you today. Our next session is May 12th at 1 p.m. Central Time. Our topic that we're planning on is portals, whether grantee or applications or reviewer portals or some mix of all of that. We would love for any of you or anybody you might know who is doing that to kind of show us how you're doing it. Everyone does it a little bit differently. So we're looking for participants in that one. If you're interested, let us know and we'll connect with you shortly. If there's any other topics you would be interested in learning more about or telling us how you use OFM, that would be great. Let us know. We're thinking potentially scholarships in the July session, but we're open to ideas as well. So if there's anything you're interested in talking more about, we're all ears. Any thoughts from anybody? Are you guys using portals today?
We've talked about it for 2 years.
Well, be sure to join us in July or in May. I'm sorry, not July. Yeah.
I had a quick question regarding the scholarships one. Does anybody do any sort of automatic vetting or criteria scoring on either grant applications or do scholarships where you do anything like that? That might be another piece we could weave into the scholarships.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah, we've only done one kind of open call process. Like we normally just have grants defined by our programs team. And we use form assembly, so we did kind of some scoring through form assembly that kind of pre-scored before it came into Salesforce. And then there was some additional analysis like scoring inside of Salesforce and dashboards.
Sounds great. Thanks for sharing, Rachel.
Yeah. And Jake says they have some workflows in form assembly as well that route folks to different spots when they're not really eligible for the program they're applying for, which makes sense.
Yeah, that's a good one too. Yeah. I think that's what a lot of people are trying to figure out is like how to route kids to, well, I shouldn't say kids, anybody who's looking for a scholarship, how to route them to the correct scholarship that they're most likely to be able to apply for, instead of making them sift through hundreds of potentially scholarships they may not qualify for.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
great idea.
All right, Jake, we may have to tap into you as well.
Great. Any other thoughts on today's session or any other topics? I saw someone in the chat would be interested in joining us on our monthly call. Lola, did you want to? I think you're still on the line here. Do you want to say hi or? Oh, Rachel's interested as well. So we'll be reaching out to you all. Thank you so much. And we're climbing up on time here.
Yeah.
Thanks for all the sessions or the demos today. Those were really cool. It sounds like folks got a good information out of those.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Have a good
Thanks,
have the rest of your afternoon. Thanks all.
Thank you.